Basically, I'll do anything for Harry Davis, though. It's a pleasure to be here, and economics is one of those disciplines that is obviously, to me, neurobiology. You're looking at how people behave with certain costs and certain benefits, and that's a calculation that our brain makes. Different brains make it in different ways, but to me, economics is definitely neurobiology, and I yearn for the day where the connection is closer. So I'm going to tell you a few stories about rats, and rats are mammals. We are mammals. We are not so far away from rats. I personally consider myself a rat with a fancy neocortex. And I'll tell you three basic stories. One is that rats will help each other. And two is that when they help in a socially selective manner. They help some and not others. And finally, I'll tell you about the influence of other individuals on one individual's actions or inaction. So this whole story began with a graduate student, Inbal Ben-Ami-Bartal, who is right here. Is my cursor working? Yes, it is. Okay, so that's Inbal Ben-Ami-Bartal. It was her idea to start this, and then we started having so much fun that I switched my entire lab over to the question of how rats help. And so what Inbal came in with was the idea that, in fact, rats will recognize the affective state, the emotional state of another rat. So if they see another rat that's frozen in fear, they may freeze. But, you know, okay, fabulous, wonderful, interesting, but it doesn't actually, that has no legs. It doesn't take you anywhere. It doesn't do anything. It's an internal experience. And so what Inbal wanted to do is to see whether rats would use that communication of affect between two individuals to do something, to act. And what we wanted to do was to see whether they would use it to act for the benefit of another who is in distress. The idea was simple, and the hurdle that we had to get over to make that happen was to make a challenge that was rat-sized instead of human-sized. And so what we ended up doing was to devise a task where the rats are in an arena that's about yay big. And in the center of the arena is a plexiglass or acrylic tube that we call the restrainer. And in that restrainer is a rat, a trapped rat. The rat on the outside can decide to do nothing, can decide to go curl up in the corner and do nothing, or it can decide that it's very concerned about this and go into the center. Going into the center is a very problematic thing for rodents. Open spaces are where they get eaten, and so they have innate fear of open spaces. If you get rodents, what they'll do is they'll circle around the periphery. They'll just circle around the edges. They'll never go into the center. And so the question was, is their distress at seeing the distress of another rat sufficient to motivate them to go into the center? And early on, we saw that it was, but you know that's not a really in-your-face metric. So what we wanted was something that they could do once they got to the center. So what we did was we put on the restrainer, we put a door that could only be opened from outside. And lo and behold, the rat on the outside not only went into the center, but spent so much time there that eventually they figured out how to get the door open. Now the first time they do it, it's kind of meaningless. They did it, it could be an accident, it probably was an accident because rats don't really know. They don't know that this is a door. And they certainly don't know that this thing right here is a counterweight, and that they should push that way instead of this way. So they don't really know what they're doing, probably. So the real question is, will they do it again? And the answer is yeah, they do it again. They do it again and again and again. Is it rewarding? Why is it rewarding? Well, our answer, which I'll show you a little bit more in the next few slides, is that it's rewarding because they get the equivalent, the rodent equivalent of the warm glow of helping. The same thing that people get when they give to a philanthropic organization. This is something that they do. They get a reward. The reward is internal, and then they do it again. So what does that look like? This is a recording of the first thing that you'll see here is a rat on the first day that he's put into the arena. And it's sped up by 20 times. So what you see is that he loves that periphery, but he does go into the center because he's concerned about the rat. And then what you're going to see next is the first time the free rat actually opens the restrainer. This is in real time. The noise is actually on for a purpose. When he opens the door, when he finally opens the door, you're going to see them freeze. It's not a glitch in the video. It's actually that they're shocked by the sound of the door falling over. So they both freeze. And then what you see is that the free rat, the rat with the dot on it, follows around the rat that he liberated. It is always in this direction that the helper rat follows the victim rat. And, ooh, shoot. I guess I can't do that. Okay. On the final day of opening, I'm going to try and turn this volume down for the final day of opening. What you'll see is that once again, he opens the door. Okay, so this is in real time. You'll see he just gets placed in right now. And instead of waiting 25 minutes before he opens, he looks around. He says, OK, same gig as yesterday. OK, and now I realize what's going on, and I'm going to go open the door. And the door still makes a sound, but they no longer freeze because they know exactly what's happening. This is the expected result of an intentional action. What you also see is that the helper rat does not follow around the victim rat quite as much. So this helper rat following around the victim rat is really what we call colloquially in the lab the celebration. And it is always the rat that helps that does it. So this is it appears as though to give is to get, and to give is to get for the rats. It's the rat that helps that feels really, woohoo, I did that. I'm glad, I'm happy. I got a reward for doing that. More so than the rat that's helped. The rat that's helped gets out, but he does not celebrate, nor does he show any bit of gratitude. And in fact, that's not that unusual. In fact, if you look at monkeys, including apes, they don't show gratitude. There's very little evidence for gratitude outside of humans. Okay, so just to make this point that the rats, they face a challenge. First of all, they have to figure out that there's another individual in distress. And they do that. And then they have to figure out how to open the door. And believe it or not, on average, that takes them 3, 4, 5 days. Okay, each day they get a chance to do it for 40 minutes, but it still takes them a few days. If I put chocolate in there, and they like chocolate, it still takes them 3, 4, 5 days. So this is a difficult task for a rat. What you're seeing here is each row is a different rat, and each colored square is a day of, each square is a day of testing, so there's 12 days of testing. And each one of these colors denotes whether they've opened once in a row, twice in a row, 11 times in a row. Once in a row is yellow, 11 times in a row is red. And what you can see is that for most of the rats, once they open once, they never miss another opportunity. They're helpers. They have converted. Now that they've figured out the motoric task, which is not trivial for a rat, they're on board. That's what they want to do. They want to go ahead and help. And so they switch. They switch from being not helping to helping. And not only that, by day 11 or 12, they're helping at less than 2 minutes. It takes them less than 2 minutes before they open the door, as you saw in the video. So in general, they make this switch into helping. It's interesting. We have done work with this 25%, approximately 25% of rats that don't ever show helping in 12 days anyway. Maybe if we carried it out for a longer time, they would, but in 12 days they don't. And who are those rats? So there's really basically two possibilities. One is they're psychopaths. They don't care. And the other one is that they care so much that they're overwhelmed by caring. And so what we did was we measured their stress hormone. In rats, that's called corticosterone. In us, it's called cortisol. And we measured their corticosterone when they saw a trapped rat. The rats with the highest corticosterone response are the rats that never opened. So they're not psychopaths. They care too much. And if you care so much, you can't be other-oriented. And that dovetails extremely well with human data. When humans are not able to downregulate their own emotion, they tend not to have other-oriented, they tend not to make other-oriented actions. Okay. I should mention that I'm very happy to take questions as I go along if you have them. Okay. Yeah. So what they're doing is they're opening a door. And you ask yourself, why are they opening the door? And so it could be because it's Mount Everest. You know, the door's there. Why not? But if the restrainer is empty, or if the restrainer has a toy rat in it, they don't open the door. So there has to be a rat there. And moreover, the helper rat has to have full affective capacity. So if we give the helper rat, or the potential helper, a drug such as a drug that is related to Valium, basically a chill pill, he sees no problem, and he doesn't help. So this is not only an opening that is requires having a rat there, but it requires affect on the part of the actor. So what does that look like? It looks like helping. It looks as though it's an intentional act for the benefit of another, which we would call helping.
I know that humans tend to help less when there is somebody else there. Have you tried putting another rat who could potentially help, and how that changes?
Yeah, can I get to that at the end? We've done the bystander. We've done the bystander, and it's super cool. It's sort of what we're working on right now. Yeah.
I was wondering your interpretation of the helper rat chasing
Oh, I don't know that that's what it means, but what I do know is that the helper rat shows this very consistently. They show an increase in velocity that lasts about 10-15 minutes after the opening. The helped rat never shows it. And if the rat gets out without the helper rat having done it, it doesn't happen.
Is there any other experiments where rats exhibit that behavior that we could kind of create a connection that you're aware of?
Not really. Yeah.
Did you ever switch the rat that was trapped with the rat that was...
So the question is, did we ever switch the trapped and the free rat? And we didn't do it because we're pretty close to the ceiling. They're opening at pretty close to maximal efficiency. So I calculated how many rats it would take for us to see a significant difference, and it was 65, and I wasn't willing to do that. But another group led by Nobuo Sato in Japan modified our paradigm, and he did switch them, and he saw a significant increase in helping if they've previously experienced what the trapped rat has experienced. Yeah?
Did you try giving the chill pill to the rat that was so stressed out?
Oh, to the rats that don't help?
Yeah, that don't bite it.
Yeah, so that's an experiment that we really, really want to do, except for the problem is that we can't identify those rats ahead of time. So we don't know who to give the, so that's a problem. But it's an experiment we'd love to do if we could figure out a marker for the rats that are going to end up being that. A marker that doesn't take a few weeks of analysis. Yeah.
You think, would they help other species too?
So one of the benefits of this kind of, we published this in December of 2011. It got a lot of attention. And so people write to me all the time with anecdotes. And this one high school student from Texas, who I tried to recruit to University of Chicago, for some reason, no. But he just wrote me what he did. So he sent me the videos. So he did rat and rat, rat and mouse, rat and lizard. Okay? Rat helps rat, rat helps mouse, rat runs the hell away from lizard. I have no idea what that means, but there you go. According to some high school student in Texas who showed me the videos. I mean, I think that there's basically a mammalian plan so that it is easier for us to interpret the affective state of another mammal than it is of a reptile, say. And that's why, we tend to have mammalian pets. Some people have reptilian pets, but the bulk of us have a bigger connection, a better, a stronger connection to other mammals. Okay, so one of the criticisms that we received early on was, well, okay, great, they help, but really, what else is there to do? Good point. So that that's a really legitimate. Oh my goodness. Okay, that's a really legitimate complaint or possibility. So what we did was we set up an experiment that we called toys. And what we did was we put a bunch of toys in the arena with this trapped rat. So there was an open restrainer, there was a ball of tape, there was this EnviroDry, which is something that they make nests out of, and they enjoy futzing around with this nesting material, and then just a door. And what we found is that it definitely lengthened the number of days that it took before the rat started to open, but they then converted just the same. Once they did open, they converted. Yeah.
Was the door an exit? Could they leave the...
No, this is just a door sitting on the, because I don't know if you, well, I guess it wasn't really in the video, but a lot of times they'll play with the door. Once it's off the restrainer, they play with the door. So we just gave them something to play with. So, you know, it's not just because there's nothing else to do. It is a impoverished scenario, but nonetheless, they still help. So the next experiment that we were motivated to do was to say, well, originally what we did was we tested rats with their cage mates. So the natural question is, well, great, they helped their cage mates. What about a stranger? So we went through a whole series of experiments, and what we found out was, yeah, they help strangers. That was kind of a little surprising, but they help strangers, and there's no obvious difference. You know, we worried about the fact that laboratory rats went through a genetic bottleneck in the early 1900s, and so strangers are kind of fifth cousins twice removed, so they're not really, really strangers. They're kind of familiar seeming, and but nonetheless, what we found was when we looked at how an albino rat would deal with a black-caped rat, what we found was that if they'd never met a black-caped rat before, they wouldn't help a black-caped rat. But if they'd lived for 2 weeks with one black-caped rat, they'd help any black-caped rat. Okay? That's a powerful push for environment. And it's so powerful that you're left wondering, well, is there any role for genetics? Can genetics do diddly squat? I mean, environment can do the whole deal. So we did one of the most fun experiments of my career, which was the Mowgli Experiment. We took these albino pups. We took one albino pup on the day of birth and transferred it to the litter of a black-caped rat. This albino pup then grew up only seeing black-caped rats, never saw another albino rat. When they grew up, the question was, who are they going to help? Well, so if you test them with a black-caped rat, you expect that they'll help them. They've lived their entire lives with them. And indeed, that's what we see. So here, they're color-coded so our computer system can follow them. Okay, so here he just opens for the black-caped rat. I haven't met you before, but you're familiar. I'm good with you. Up goes the door. When you test it with the albino rats, not so much. So here, for this rat, the walls are extremely interesting. They're just not, they don't even go there. Yeah?
Does the rat know that it's a albino rat?
Well, you know, you can't do interviews with rats. But so far as helping goes, they will not help an albino rat. So it would suggest that, at least as far as helping goes, that albino rat is not part of their in-group. If you think about it, we have sensory systems that we get for free. We mammals have sensory systems we get for free. And those sensory systems can tell us a lot about who's around us. And so as you're raised, you see everyone around you. There are basically no mirrors in nature, so you see, the individuals you see around you become your self-image. On the other hand, do we have a system for detecting DNA? I mean, we have technology, but it has cost us millions to develop. It's not easy, and it's not even foolproof. So the idea that these rats are going to use sensory systems, I see these individuals around me, that's who I'm going to look for, makes a lot of sense to me, rather than them somehow knowing that we share DNA. Because there's just no biological basis for knowing that that two individuals share DNA. Yeah.
So the albino rats adopted brothers and sisters from albino rats because they've seen an albino rat?
We haven't tested that. We did do one test where the albino rat was only exposed to the black Cape rats for 21 days at the beginning of its life, and they helped. So I think it's pretty long lasting. I would expect yes, but we don't know. Yeah.
So you're saying a black-type rat would help a mouse previously?
Well, no, I didn't do that. A high school student did that.
A rat would help a mouse, you said?
Again, I did not do that. I don't know that, but I have been told.
Okay.
I have seen a video of such an event, but it's an anecdote. Okay, so the final thing I wanted to share with you is, it goes back to your question about bystanders, and just to share with you what the bystander effect is. There's a great book by Latane and Darley called The Unresponsive Bystander, Why Doesn't He Help? This was published in 1970, shortly after the Kitty Genovese story was talked about in the New York Times. The report in the New York Times was apocryphal. It is apocryphal. It's not incorrect, but the report had a big impact on society, because the idea was that this woman was raped and murdered on a summer night in New York City, and dozens of people had their windows open because it was a hot night, and no one called for help. That's not what happened, but it's the story that got communicated. And there is an element of truth there. So what Latane and Darley did was they went and they compared individuals' behavior when they're alone and when they're in groups. And this example with smoke is exemplary for what they found. So they have a person come into a room, they're filling out a form. This is just a distractor form, and they put some smoke coming into the room, and 75% of the individuals who are tested as individuals leave the room to report that there's smoke coming into the room. When those individuals are tested in a group of 3, it's down to 13%. Why is that? So I had 2 students, John Havlick, who's a neuroscience major in the college, and Mara Clement, who's a medical student at Pritzker, work on this. And what they found was that if you add in more rats, they just help faster. Okay? Now, this was a surprise to us to begin with, but then we actually looked at the human data. And in fact, if you add in more people there to a situation where there is an obvious need, then people are more likely to help. What Latane and Darley had found, and what most people who study the bystander effect have found in psychology labs, has used something called confederates. So you pay somebody on the research team actually is in the situation and is told not to do something, not to help. So when those individuals were put into the room with 2 other individuals, they were confederates. They were told to ignore the smoke. So now this person's sitting there, and there's these 2 other people that are saying, you know, you're looking over there and saying, wow, I think that's smoke. I'm worried, but they're not worried. So they're not worried. So what we did was we made confederates, Confederate rats. So this is the situation, and we've done it with both 2 confederates and 1 confederate. And so the red rat and the blue rat both have a chill pill on them on board, so they're not going to help. They don't see the problem. This green guy is naive. And what does he do? So if he's acting alone, if he's acting on his own impulses, he should help at the same rate as a rat would when he's alone. But he doesn't. He helps much, much less because he's affected by the surround. And I think that's a really, really important message for us all, that we're affected by the people around us, we're affected by their actions, we are affected by our perceptions of what they're perceiving, our perceptions of their perceptions and their intentions. And as you go to dinner, I would suggest that you look around. If you're eating by yourself, what happens? You pick up your fork, you start to eat. If you're eating at a table, what do? You look around, you see who's eating. I'm not gonna be the first one, I'm gonna wait till other people eat. The bystander effect is essentially the fact that we're social beings. We are social mammals, just like the rats. We care about what other individuals, we're adding to our own assessment of a situation our perception of other individuals' perceptions. That's just adding information, no downside under natural circumstances. So, so what I hope I've conveyed to you is that these rats act in ways that are very mammalian and that have a lot of ties into how we humans act. And I think that, as you go through business, as you go through life, what you'll see is that humans act, yes, in an economic way, and yes, in a political way, but they also act through their biology. And their biology, the inherited biology that they have, that we share with rats, is not a trivial input to our behavior. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take more questions. Yeah.
I don't know a whole lot about rats, but are they social creatures? Is this like altruism, or is it like I want a buddy to play with and he's trapped in there, so I want him to come hang out?
So I didn't talk about that, but the first explanation for why they should do this is because they want to play with them. That's the most obvious explanation, and we worried a lot about it. But what we did to look at this was we put two arenas together, and we put the restrainer against the divide so that when the rat opened it, the other rat went into the other arena and they couldn't play together. And they keep on opening for that rat. And if the restrainer is empty, they don't open for it, but if the restrainer has a trapped rat. And Nobuo Sato did it slightly differently. He came up with the same result. So they're not doing it, obviously they would love to play, but it's not necessary. Yeah?
So you said that there's some rats that don't help the rat that's in the tube, and it's basically, let's call it them being a psychopath.
It basically what?
Them being like a psychopath.
It's not that they're psychopath. No, it's that they care too much.
So
it's the opposite of a psychopath.
So they care too much, they don't help them out? I'm saying the ones that don't help them out of the tube.
That's correct. They're not psychopaths. They care too much. This is just like people who get overwhelmed with affect at the sight of something distressing. They're so distressed that they're locked in their own distress. They are immobile. This is why, physicians, there's a lot of talk about physicians having empathy. Well, they can have empathy, but they got to dial it down. If they have too much empathy, they're not going to be good physicians. You got to dial it down, and that's been a consistent result in human literature, and it is our finding in the rats.
But the second part of that question was, you said there's no way to determine what type of rats they are without a test that takes several weeks.
So when we get a group of rats, we don't know which ones are going to end up opening and which ones are going to end up not opening. We can't instantaneously analyze the corticosteroid. If we could, we would be able to do that.
Right, but you're saying there's a way you can test, but it takes several weeks, is what you said earlier, like 21 days or so. Are you testing it?
Well, it's 12 days, yeah.
Okay, are you doing a genetic marker? Are you doing a hormonal test? What are you testing to see what the difference between the two are?
We've looked at various behavioral markers, and we can't tell the difference between them. I mean, there's a lot more that we could do, but we've thus far failed. Yeah.
Do you do any level of
We haven't looked inside the brain yet. Sexy as though it may be, I personally feel that the most interesting questions remain behavioral and unanswered. Yeah?
Just curious, what percent of the population that you tested was unable to perform?
Don't open after 12 days? It's 25%. It's roughly 25%. Yeah?
Just out of curiosity, why rats?
So, rats are just, we know a ton about rats. They're really great, chill animals. They're just not all uptight. Mice are super uptight, super high maintenance, very anxious, and they don't do this. Probably because they can't get over themselves. And then sort of what other experimental animal is there? You know, that's kind of why rats. Yeah.
I was wondering, so we know that 25% of rats are so overwhelmed that they cannot do anything.
Yeah.
Has there been any, like, and I would assume that people, some part of people experience a similar problem.
Right.
That they get stressed and overwhelmed and they cannot perform. Has there been some research of what can be done, apart from obviously chill pill and other medications?
No, I mean, that is treating anxiety pharmacologically is typically what's thought as a remedy. I should say that it is our impression, in this experiment, it's our impression that this open restrainer that they can go into, it's a different beast than a closed restrainer. It's our impression that that acts as a non-pharmacological chill pill.
So like there are some, basically, if we go away from pharmacology,
Yeah.
there are some ways to train or to learn things that could help deal with that stress, or would that be correct?
I mean, I think that anything that deals with anxiety, such as people reduce their anxiety in innumerable ways. And those things are going to help individuals act. Yeah.
Do you have any theories in terms of why they would develop this as a benefit for them?
Why do the animals help? So the going idea on this is that mammals help because mom has to know how the babies feel, has to know when they're hungry, when they're in danger, when they're cold, etc., or the babies die and she's an evolutionary dead end, right? Mom has to know. And so then mom knew, and then it got generalized across. I think this is I don't think this holds a whole lot of water, personally. I don't think there's ever been any study where you look at, for instance, animals with different parental strategies, and those that have, say, broadcast reproduction, where in the sea, where the male just sends out a lot of sperm, the female sends out a lot of eggs, and if they meet in the water, fabulous. If not, there's others that will meet, and the species goes on. And I would suspect that some of those species also show helping. Why? Because helping, it gives you a lot of advantages. If I'm sitting here and then I see that guy look like he's scared out of, incredibly scared, I think, oh, well, there might be a predator around. I'm going to go hide too. This is going to give you advantages in terms of safety from predation, finding food, and taking care of offspring. Yeah. The open restrainer it's a nice tight space, but they're not locked in there. So kind of a version of a temple grandin, not quite that tight, but yeah. Yeah.
Did the rats who were trapped have a higher propensity to help out later on?
So we never did that experiment, but Nobuya Sato did a version of that, and yes. Yeah. Right. So what we found and what we tested was 2 weeks of living together, and that worked. I put in some grants to try and figure out what it was, and those didn't work, so I haven't done those experiments. But I have a colleague named Jeff Mowgli from Montreal, and so he's looking at a slightly different situation. This is an fMRI study and a psychophysical study. If I see another individual who's experiencing pain, how do I empathize with that individual? And in his setup, if this individual is a stranger, they don't empathize, okay? But if they take strangers and they have them play Guitar Hero together for a half an hour, then they care. So, what would I give to know what a rat's Guitar Hero is? A lot, but I don't know. It's a great question.
Did you measure like if there were any differences based on like age or sex of the rat or like what other things like that?
So we didn't do age because our setup is pretty, as it is right now, it's invariant, and if they're too small, the restrainer is a cage. It's not a restrainer. It's not a problem. And if it's too big, they can't fit in it. So we really have to hit that sweet spot. And as far as gender goes, there's no excuse, and I'm not going to tell you that there is. Bad me. But we did these experiments for a variety of reasons. I was using male rats. So these experiments were done on male rats. We checked the experiment in female rats. And what we found was that if the floor is no helping and the male rats were here, the female rats were here. So to me, the story is that rats help, not that females are slightly better, significantly, but slightly better than males. And as it stands right now, if somebody comes into my lab, I tell them, you can use either male rats or female rats. And then if they opt for female rats, I say, well, you have to go back and do all these basic controls before you can go. And then they say, okay, I changed my mind, I'm going to use male rats. So that's where we are, and I have no excuse. Yeah.
Yeah, so this helping nature, is this number related to survival of species and advancement of species?
So there are ultimate and proximal reasons for things that we do. So reproduction ultimately has a very beneficial effect on survival of the continuation of a species. But it is also unlikely that every time that people have sex, that's the reason they have sex. So they have sex for proximal reasons, for fun, for pleasure. And it's probably the same thing for helping. So what I'm more interested in is the proximal reasons why an individual decides to help or not to help. There are many evolutionary theories as to why helping would be advantageous to survival of oneself, to survival of one's offspring, and to survival of the species in general. But I don't do those kinds of experiments because then you have to work on a species level, and we're just looking at rats. So we're just really looking at what are the proximal reasons why this individual chooses to do this, help, rather than stay in the corner and sulk, which is easier to do.
Take one more question.
Yeah.
So a lot of mammals show helping around, like warning each other against the predator that's coming, or when herbivores eat, one's like keeping its head up to.
Right.
So were you expecting rats to act differently, or?
Rats act differently than.
Were you expecting rats to act differently from other mammals,
Oh, well, when we started this, the only helping that had really been described was in primates. This is the first rodent non-anecdotal evidence for helping.
So why, like, when deers like warn each other from predators, why is it like helping? What's the difference in the behavior?
I mean, again, it's kind of anecdotal. No one's going to study a deer in a laboratory. Yeah. So this gives you a model which you can take it out on the road and see what it's worth, right? You can throw things at it, such as the Mowgli experiment, which you can't do in humans. I can't take one type of person and switch them at birth to a family from a different area. So I can do that in the rats, and that's powerful. It tells us a lot about who we as mammals are. Okay, well, I'm happy to take some more questions after. Thank you.